But my name's Brad Cole. I'm the Director of Special Collections and Archives, and Dean Clement, Dean of the Libraries, unfortunately can't be here today, and he gave me the pleasure of welcoming everybody to the Merrill Kazir Library for the author exhibition. We have a great program on tap, so I'll just take a minute, and we're just pleased to see everyone here, see all these wonderful books. I work in an area where we have tons of primary source material that students use to create these projects and wonderful books, so it's always nice to see the circle come full turn. And so excited that hopefully people can take a look at these afterwards. We're pleased that we have great support from the university community for the library, central administration, and the whole library community supports us in electronic access to databases and journals, and it's just we think we have a fabulous collection here. And so what more can I say? I'm pretty short on introductions. I should mention that we're in the process of putting on in a new exhibit for the Logan poet Mae Swenson, which will be opened up in the next couple of days, and so hopefully you'll come back and take a look at that. We're pretty excited about that. And now it's my pleasure to introduce Mark McClellan, Dean of the Graduate School and Vice President for Research. Thanks.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it. Well, welcome. We're in the middle of Research Week, and I said earlier today, if you want to see an office that's just going crazy pulling our hair out, just stop by my office, because we're trying to figure out how our day is going each of these. We've had an unbelievable week, starting with the Research Gala on Monday night, where we announced the new D. Wynn Thorne awardee, John Neely from the College of Art. And for that award, that's pretty groundbreaking, because it's an artist that's being recognized for their research creativity, and very novel and very exciting to see. It has been a full week. We've had training for faculty all day yesterday, and numerous workshops, a great launch today with the D. Wynn Thorne lecture, and of course this afternoon with our faculty authors. By the way, if you've looked at these, there's about 34 books here that our faculties have authored this year, and just fantastic productivity. And I love to pause right here and say a few words about authoring books. Sometimes people look at me as a vice president of research and say, all he cares about is money, or all he cares about is journal publications. Well, let me tell you this. The journal publications are the foundation upon which we're able to put together some extraordinary collections of thinking, a broad, expressive, deep collection of thinking that's often what's embodied in books. You can't do that in a journal publication. So the value of books in our science and the value of books out of the academy will always be a great strength. Never think twice that they're not incredibly valued and appreciated for the compilation of thinking, analysis, and expression of vision that comes in that publication called a book. So we are excited and want to encourage that to continue. The books pages that are in all of these here represent an incredible wealth of time and usually passion. You don't sit down to write something like this without having incredible passion. And we want to recognize that passion. That's part of what this celebration is all about. We congratulate all of our faculty authors and appreciate the effort and time you've put in. And we have, of course, a very special celebration this evening that we're going to be talking about, or this afternoon, rather. And I'm going to ask Chris Conti to handle that introduction. So.
Good afternoon, everybody. It's my great pleasure to introduce Bob McPherson, my colleague in the history department. He isn't physically in our history department, but he certainly is intellectually in our department, even though he lives in Blanding, a place I would very much like to live. I feel a special, I guess I could say, kinship with Bob. He's a member of my tribe, the tribe of historians, and also a person who looks at indigenous culture. I was reading a little bit of a review on Bob's book, and it said, well, it's amazing that this guy who's an outsider can elucidate the inside of a culture. And I think I faced the same thing in studying about Africa as an outsider, trying to discern what's happening in a culture that I didn't grow up in, trying to learn new languages, doing the work of research, which is often tedious and enlightening at the same time, and also studying an era for Bob's work in this indigenous culture, an era of momentous change and transformation. And that's what historians do as well, as we study change and transformations. He's studying a people who were colonized, whose traditions and culture were turned, were changed, were challenged, and he's tried to make some sense of that for us. And that's a very, very important job, and that is the job of the historian. So with that, I give you Bob McPherson.
I don't think that works. Does that work? I'm not going to worry about it. Can you hear me in the back? Hear me okay?
It's for the camera, so if you
we
can
better-
flip it on, throw it in your pocket, that's great.
Me and technology. I'm right there. Okay, just put it in my pocket.
Throw it in your pocket, put it on your camera.
Okay, we can do that. Let me start out by saying that it's an honor to be here. I appreciate very much being asked to do this, and I also recognize that there are 32 other people, most of you, probably a number of you are here in the audience that could be up here, just like I am, talking about what you did. I appreciated the things that, I'm going to put it here, that Chris said in terms of what I've tried to accomplish. And I'm not going to spend much time talking about what I've tried to accomplish. I'm going to try to synthesize and provide a context for Navajo thought and the things that Dr. McClellan said about thinking, and all of this diverse thinking in here is, it's a way of viewing the world. And that's what I want to talk about today, viewing the world through Navajo eyes. I have two books up here, and they both tie together. One is, it's called Navajo Tradition and Mormon Life, the autobiography and teachings of Jim Dandy. Jim Dandy is a friend of mine who lives in Blanding and asked that I work with him to write his life story, and I gladly did that. He is a treasure trove of information about traditional Navajo culture. The second book, everyone is afraid to try to pronounce it, but it's really easy. It's Dinejanatim. And that is a Navajo word that means basically Navajo traditional teachings. And I added history on there because one of the things that I really enjoy is taking historical events and then viewing those through Navajo eyes, which is a very, very different view than what you get from non-Navajo people. We got a lot of white faces out here, I've got one person I know that's a friend of mine that's in class with me this semester. But it's a very, very different perspective. And that's what I really want to talk about today. I've been cautioned that not to get too far and go too fast on something that is not really part of, the general public's understanding. And so what I want to do today is I want to start with where we all are, us Anglo, predominant, Anglo-American people that are here, and give you a Navajo perspective of how you're viewed as a people. Okay? And then we'll go from there. We'll talk a little bit about how Navajo view things. We'll look at some Navajo metaphors, some teachings, and kind of tie it all together, hopefully in a half an hour, or maybe even less than that, to make some sense and hopefully give you something to walk away with. So that it's not some kind of esoteric discussion of, well, I didn't get it. What was he talking about? So here we go. What I'm going to present here is I'm going to call a traditional Navajo view. I'm already in trouble because tradition is constantly changing. Ideas are constantly changing. Not every Navajo person believes or accepts the things that I'm going to talk about. So I'm using kind of a modal personality and just say, okay, if we take the middle ground, and this is based on my having interviewed a lot of Navajo elders. When I say a lot, I've got somewhere around 150 interviews that I've done with Native American people. Sometimes 3 or 4 interviews with the same person. So that's what I'm basing my information on, how I'm directing my thoughts. Okay? But you Anglo people are amazing. You are a gifted people. Not that we haven't had our troubles and our problems, and there are some major things in history, like the Long Walk and livestock reduction and so forth, that were very damaging to Navajo culture and Navajo people. But if you think about it, you people can rip out the heart of a person and put another heart back in and send that person down the road. That's amazing. You can put a man on the moon. That's amazing. You can go out to the desert and find certain rocks and crush them up in a certain way and hit them in a certain way, and you can make lightning. Enough lightning to kill over 100,000 people at Hiroshima and 100,000 people at Nagasaki. Amazing people. How do you do this? How can you do these things? And we have to understand that our tradition, Anglo-American tradition that I'm talking about, comes from a long line of thinking along certain lines. We often hear people talk about, well, you think outside the box or you think within the box. And our heritage comes from, you can take it even before the Greeks Rome and excuse me. You can take it to the Greeks. You can take it to the Romans for law. You can take it up to the Renaissance. You can take it up to the Enlightenment. And you have thinkers like Descartes and Montesquieu and Newton and Benjamin Franklin that have taught all of us or have shaped our thinking that we work and live in a physical world. This is kind of like Madonna, material girl, material world. And that's where we are. We work in this material world. And we are experts at it. How do we do these things? It's an amazing thing to think about. As you do think about it, it's kind of the sea that we swim in. If we use this analogy, and I'm going to kind of build on this, if we use this analogy of, how do we think about things, we go to our overall overarching culture. And we swim like fish in the water through our culture every day. And it's accepted. And it's how we think about things. It's why we do things. We're comfortable with it. And even when we have problems that arise, we turn to our cultural understanding for our answers. And, speaking in a general sense, scientific explanation of the world. We understand our physical world in an incredible way. So we can rip out that heart and put the man on the moon. And it's phenomenal. From a Navajo perspective, that cultural understanding is very, very foreign. They can see it, they can understand it, but they're working from an entirely different base. So if we're that fish in the sea that's swimming through our culture every day, it's not until we get that hook in our mouth, we get pulled out of that culture, we end up on a boat in a very, very different environment, and then we have to think and adapt and do things in a different way. So maybe we ought to give credit to Walt Disney and The Little Mermaid for this view of the metaphor of being either in the ocean that we're used to swimming in or getting flipped out of the ocean in a foreign environment. Okay? So, as we think about it this way, then we have to ask ourselves, well, if the Navajo people live in a physical world, they understand physical things. They're sharp observers. Very, very, sharp observation and characterization and so forth. But their underlying premise is so different. What is that underlying premise? Well, in a sense, historically speaking, you can go back to Anglo culture, and there used to be a time where we used to be a lot closer to thinking in the same way that the Navajo people do, in the religious sense. Now today, when we see someone and we say goodbye, we never think about the origin of that word, where it really means God be with you. But if you go back to the Middle Ages, and we've got Norm Jones here and other people that could speak to this much better than I do, but there was an age of faith during the Middle Ages where answers came from religious teachings and religious institutions that explained why the world was the way it was and how we should act in that world. But once we get involved heavily into science and the physical world and how that whole view changed to the point now where in our society, it's a lot of times, it ain't cool to be talking about religion, And religion is put in an area off to the side where it's one of those categories. We deal with things in boxes and categories, and we pick up the religion, and then we put it down and so forth. For the Navajo people, their perspective is a religious perspective. And their understanding of why things happen, how they happen, what is going to happen in the future, what has happened in terms of history, is all filtered through these eyes of religion. And it's a very, very different world. And in a world where you are trained to look at things primarily through what has happened physically, to step over here and start explaining things through religious, invisible, untangible things that are taking place over here, it's kind of like, are you kidding me? I'm not going to buy that. That's not the way it is. Well, why isn't it? Because you can't prove it. You can't physically hold something up and say, this is the way it is. Okay? You're dealing with things that are intangible. Now, I'm not going to be a Baptist minister up here and stumping on saying, everybody's got to get religion and so forth. But for the Navajo people, this view becomes the means of explaining what has happened or what is there. So there is an explanation in Navajo teachings as to why there is uranium in the ground and why it contains that power. There's an explanation why Christy McAuliffe in the Challenger was killed along with the other astronauts. Okay? There's an explanation as to what is the oil in the ground. Where did that come from? There's an explanation of how this world was created, and there's an explanation about how this world is going to end that is there. But it's very, very difficult for people who don't get on the inside to understand that, to accept it. Because it's a very, very different set of understandings. Now, I want to talk for just a minute about metaphors, because when we talk about metaphors, this is a very, very intense cultural expression. And Navajos are great at, as I said, observing things and tying them into stories and metaphors. What the Anglo people don't buy are the stories. You mean that there were monsters that roamed the earth? You mean that there were these things that happened here? Couldn't be. But what if that metaphor was just that, a metaphor or an explanation, a symbolic representation of things that were very, very important? I've said it a couple times, I'm going to say it one more time. We're masters at manipulating the physical world. Navajo people traditionally put their energy and their emphasis into religious things. And they are experts at using supernatural and spiritual power that we cannot explain or understand. Now, some of you are thinking, come on. I know we got a lot of science books back here. And our scientists are probably saying, come on now, what do you mean by that? Anybody that has worked on the reservation for any length of time realizes that there are things that happen there on that reservation that cannot be just explained away through physical means. Pick up any trader book, anybody that's lived in the community of Navajo people, and they'll start talking about things that are really, really hard to understand. The first chapter in that Denejinanatin book is about, well, to use the Anglo term, divination. For Navajo people, it's hand trembling, wind listening, stargazing, crystal gazing. It's a means of telling things that are going to happen or that have happened in the future. You might think of it kind of like a crystal ball in a sense. But it works. And I don't have an explanation. I'm not here to convert you, to make you all converts to this. But what I want you to understand is there's a regular system and pattern that is used to get things that Anglo people can't understand. If I sent a Navajo person out with a rock and said, you see this uranium, this yellow cake right here? Start pounding on it. See if you can get some kind of explosion going. It's not going to happen. It's the same thing with Anglo people. Anglo people really struggle to understand because when you get flipped out of your water and you end up on the boat, it's so different. It's so different. Let me share a couple of experiences with you. In Jim Dandy, when I was working with Jim Dandy, he would talk about things that were very, very easily recognizable as teachings from traditional Navajo people. And he told me this experience of one time where he and his wife had gone to the bank and gotten some money. And they put it in an envelope, and she put it in her purse. And they walked out and were doing some things on the street, and she had to go back into her purse. And she went into her purse and pulled out the thing that she needed. The money that was in there in that envelope flipped out. They didn't realize that had happened. It blew under the car. And it wasn't their car, but it blew under a car. And they went on their merry way and thought life is good. And then when they got home, she went to get the money. It wasn't there. So it's kind of like, what are we going to do? So they turned to a relative who understands hand trembling. Hand trembling is a means of, again, telling something that has happened in the past, the present, or the future that you need to have an answer to. And so they went to a relative who was a hand trembler, and this person got the signals and understood and interpreted and said, you will get your money back within a few days. The person perceived in their mind a hand holding the envelope and got the impression that this was going to be returned. A couple of days later, the police showed up, said there was a man who found this envelope, there was the bank receipt in there, and here's your money back. They got it back. Okay? Wow. For Anglo people, very, very difficult to accept and to understand those things. When I was working on this book, Navajo tradition, Mormon life. Jim Dandy was raised as a apprentice to become a medicine man. His grandfather was a medicine man, his grandmother was a medicine woman, and his father was a medicine man, all deeply entrenched in traditional Navajo teachings that he picked up. There's 4 chapters in there that just deal with traditional Navajo teachings. Nothing to do with his life specifically, but more the teachings. So he's headed in this path. He wants to become a medicine man. But there were things that came up and that changed his views. And that's just great. And what he is right now is a transitional figure. Today, as the grandmothers and grandfathers die off, much of this knowledge and understanding is going. It's lost. And the younger generation, for the most part, gets bits and pieces, but does not see the complete picture. What we're talking about here is the manipulation of power. Just as scientists can talk about harnessing different kinds of power, there are spiritual types of power that are powerful forces, especially with the traditional Navajo people. And that's what both of these books examine. How can you take something that is going on today and compare it to something that happened thousands of years ago, or 100 years ago, or 200 years ago, and see the relative connections? It happens this way. Many, many Navajo people, when they get involved in an activity, will interpret that activity, whatever it may be, through traditional teachings, the things that happened. I helped a Navajo man who was a code talker during World War II to tell his story and to explain how he saw it. It was interesting to me. This man was on Kwajalein, Tinian, Saipan, and Iwo Jima. And for anybody that's familiar with those Pacific islands during World War II, you know he was into some stuff. And the thing that he kept coming back to is the thing that kept me alive, the thing that kept me going, the thing that saved me. It wasn't the training. It wasn't the rifles, the artillery pieces. It was the prayers and the songs. And that comes from the bedrock of Navajo traditional beliefs, which is in the teachings, mythological teachings, that are metaphors that hold power. It is all about power. And I don't mean that in a negative sense. What I'm trying to communicate here is this idea that we have physical power and we center on physical powers as Anglo people. Navajo people look at the interaction between the invisible, the unseen, and the visible. Let me give you a couple of examples. And I don't want to get too heavy here on some of this stuff. I'm starting to feel like a Baptist preacher. But, you know, Navajo people have a lot of fun with metaphors. Just a couple of my favorite ones. They've named McDonald's. These are some really contemporary ones. They call McDonald's a god, which means the knees. And boy, you know, try to figure out knees. What does that have to do with knees? There's a very excellent book, Wisdom Sits in Places, written by a man named Keith Basso, that has studied Apache stories and Apache teachings. And he has a great section in his book talking about metaphors. And basically, to cut to the chase, he says, when you have that aha experience and you get it, it's kind of like, yes, I see that. I can see that now. I had trouble getting knees and McDonald's until a person explained to me, well, you know what it is you look at those golden arches, those are like the knees that are under the table while you're eating. And so they call it knees. Okay. Another one of my favorites say, hey, I was driving down the road with a Navajo friend off to actually do an interview with a Navajo medicine man. And we were just talking about things, and my friend Baxter said, hey, Bob, hey, you know what they call a hitchhiker? I said, no, what do they call a hitchhiker? Dlum. Dlum. Well, that's prairie dog. Why prairie dog? You look at them. They stand by the side of the road. They got their hands up like this. They're watching the cars go by. And if they aren't careful, they get hit. You know, so, okay, all right. And I hope that some of you aren't bluebirds. That's another one. These are just fun ones. Bluebirds. In the stories, in the stories, as the animals were playing a game and so forth, it went on a long time during the night. And the bluebird was the one that was sitting there, and we've all done this before, sitting there and was really, really tired. And so you get one of these and you jerk up. So when you see a person that does that in a meeting or whatever, say, oh, look, hey, look, that person's a bluebird, you know, type of thing. So those are just kind of fun things. Those are on the everyday kind of fun ways of looking at the world through very, very different eyes, through keen observation. Let's get into something a little bit more intense, okay? I think everybody here probably knows when I say a Navajo sand painting, what a sand painting is. And Anglo people, and this is not a criticism of any culture or any people or whatever, you know, just looking at different things. But Anglo people look at that and they say, wow, that's a beautiful picture. That is great. I love that picture. And now you can even find sand paintings that are put on on the boards and so forth, and you can bring them and hang them up in your home. But sand paintings come from a ceremony. And depending upon the length of the ceremony, can be one night or all the way up to 9 nights, or it can be one day up to 9 days, but you always, within 12 hours, the sand painting is destroyed. And for an Anglo person, it's kind of like, oh, this beautiful picture, all that work. It took them so long to do that. Why do they do that? Now, if we have a real purist Anglo in here, someone would stand up and say, well, wait a minute, it's not a sand painting. It's really called a dry painting. And that's because they use charcoal and they use different kinds of things besides sand, in addition to sand and that. And that's what we center on. That's what we think about, those physical things. If you look at what a Navajo person calls a sand painting, it is totally different. It's called ikka. I need some water. No, my pronunciation isn't. It's called ikka. What does that mean? Yeah? Yeah?
It means like,
Thanks. Thank you. Okay. They are coming. Yeah. Wow. Sand painting? They are coming. What the heck is that about? They are coming. Thank you. That's good. Maybe my pronunciation will get better now. So, okay. The whole thing that goes on in a ceremony with these sand paintings is that you are connecting the physical world, the person who is sick, with the intangible world. I'm going to call them the holy people. The holy people that helped to create this world. So what do? All of a sudden we've shifted from this idea of a physical sand painting to they are coming. Well, we know now who's coming. It's the holy people. And before you even start the ceremony, you hang a blanket up in the door, and that's a signal that a ceremony, something important is taking place inside. It's best to have this done in a hogan, that rounded dome-shaped house that's emblematic of the Navajo people, because there's a smoke hole. And the holy people can come and they can look down that smoke hole and they can see what's happening, seeing that things are good. In a ceremony, you don't lean against the wall, though it may be all day that you're sitting there. You sit forward. Why? Because the holy people, when they come, they walk behind the people that are the physical people that you see there and are going to participate in that ceremony. And when that sand painting, which is really a picture of something that happened in the story, in the myths, in the traditional teachings, is sprinkled with corn pollen and is activated, the holy people are there, and the patient is going back in time to the first time that it ever happened, when that person was cured of that same ill that this physical patient that is sitting here has. Okay? Wow. All of a sudden, that's very, very different than worrying about, is this a sand painting or a dry painting? See? So what we're saying here is that invisible world, that intangible world is here, it's present, it's part of life. It's part of everyday life. And everything you do in your daily life has repercussions. Now, I know oh man, I've got to get going. Okay, I'll cut this short here. I think 5 minutes, right? Is that what we said? Okay? Okay, all right. So I'll make this really short. But here you go. I think most people are familiar with the ancestral Pueblans, or the Anasazi. Mesa Verde, Hovenweep, Chaco Canyon, that type of thing. Okay. Here's the bottom line for this. The Navajo people lived in that area and were around those ruins but didn't go in, because unless you understood how to control the power that was there, you could become influenced by elements that were in there. But to the Navajo people, looking at these people, there's a whole series of teachings that we don't have time to go through today. But the bottom line is this. They, like the Anglo, and Navajo people will make this comparison, they, like the Anglo people, were a gifted people. And the Navajo can tell you, oh, they used to be able to do things like fly and controlled lightning, and they had sacred designs, and they took these sacred designs and they didn't treat them sacredly. So what they did is they splashed them on the rocks. We call it rock art. Or they put them on their pottery, maybe the designs that would be interpreted as wind and so forth. And the holy people became very, very angry and upset that these powerful things and these powerful images would be abused and misused. And so the Anasazi were destroyed. Now, this is flying totally in the face of archaeology and anthropology and so forth. But they talk about those people were gifted. They didn't pay attention to the things that were important, and so they were destroyed. And there's a whole catalog of things that are happening today that are taking people in that same direction. And Navajo people have teachings about what the end of the world is going to be like and what those signs are that are indicating that we're moving in that direction. There's a chapter in the Dinejananatin on this. And there's a lot of variety to those teachings. It's not just one thing. It's lots and lots of different things. But here's the thing. The land becomes a mnemonic device, a memory jogger. And every time you go by one of those ruins, or you see some rock art on the wall, or you come across something that the Anasazi left behind, it's a reminder. It's a memory jogger. Don't you end up like that. Don't you end up like the Anasazi. Well, okay. We'll close it down for now and just say, what I hope I've communicated to you is this. Okay, although Navajo people, if you took a traditional Navajo person, they could not put together a nuclear bomb or do heart surgery. You know, Anglo people, in the same respect, cannot do a lot of the things that they do through the powers that they control through religious teachings. Those stories are metaphors, and they hold power. And that power is just as real to them as the physical power and the physical things that Anglo people can accomplish. Is there a total separation between the two? No. There can be plenty of mixing too. But if you're looking at the bottom line in a simplified 25-minute talk, that's what I'd like to leave with you. That's what I hope you to understand, that both groups are concerned with different kinds of power that impact both the physical world and the invisible world with the holy people. So with that, let's go ahead and open up to any questions. I think we can take a few questions if people would like to ask anything. Please.
So I typically differentiate between religious and spiritual, but you sort of mixed them together. Do the Navajos look at stuff like that?
How do you separate them?
Religion to me is often a human construct that has sort of separate kinds of lore or rules and stuff like that, and spiritual is much more what I perceive Navajo tradition to be based on.
Mm-hmm.
Or if I'm wrong.
Well, I think you could definitely call it, although there is not a word for religion in the Navajo language, it is definitely a religion. And for instance, Gladys Reichard wrote a book called The Compulsive Word that talks about how prayer is something that, if done correctly, the holy people are bound by it. And that really is the religion part, I think, that you're saying, that you're talking about. So I think that for the Navajo, there'd be no separation on that. So, okay. Any other thoughts, questions? Please, Charlie.
Well, I'm totally an outsider. But one observation I've had is that from the Navajo people that I've met, they have a tremendous, deep, and wonderful sense of humor
Oh, yeah.
that I think is really a big cultural difference between Anglos. I mean, Anglos have sense of humor as well,
Mm-hmm.
but it never seems to be quite as deep or pervasive as what I've encountered.
Great observation. And you know, the humor is very, very different. Humor, when we talk about culture, we're culturally tuned into what works in our culture in terms of humor, and Navajo culture has their term. And when you tell a joke, you tell a joke in English and you translate into Navajo, it goes as flat as can be. It's kind of like, what? What are you talking about? I don't get it. It's not funny. So yeah, very, very good observation. Any other thoughts or questions? Please. One.
I've had the pleasure of reading a lot of his work.
I paid him to say that, by the way. You know. I'll get you the rest after, but I just don't have that much money with it now. So.
So
Thanks.
I'd like to talk about the way that this metaphor works in terms of landscape. I mean, as we're reading our co-bridge, the idea that the bridge breathes, that must create a very different sense of landscape.
Well, and that's part of the Navajo metaphor, and that's really a lengthy question to be answered. But let me just give you some ideas, some overall ways of thinking about not just the landscape, but also the world in general. In Navajo thinking, everything is either male or female. And what that means is you can have a male tree and a female tree. You can have a male cloud and a female cloud. When we used to get a real good rainstorm that we all loved down there in Blanding, my kids would come running in, Dad, we're having a male rain today. You know, the lightning and the thunder and the water's coming. Yeah, this is definitely a male one. Individuals have a male and female side. Even though I am a male, my left side is male, my right side is female. My right nostril is female, my left nostril is male. And the reason for that is that if you go back to the creation stories, everything is either male or female. There is no thing out there that is not categorized. Now, when you talk about the landscape is a breathing part of Mother Earth. And you have Father Sky. And there are teachings about Mother Earth and Father Sky. There's great stories. Just one quick one. You get me started, you know. Just one quick one here. Mother Earth and Father Sky were really working well together. Things were going really well. And the rains were coming from the sky, watering the earth, and the land was blossoming, and the animals were happy, the people were happy, everything was wonderful. And then one day, Mother Earth said to Father Sky, golly, I'm beautiful, aren't I? This female thing, you know. Golly, I'm beautiful, aren't I? And he said, well, yes, you are, but it's because I bring the rains. No, I'd be beautiful anyway. Well, you can see what happens. I'll cut it short. It's a much longer story. But there's this huge argument, and Father Sky says, okay, that's it. Turned his back on Mother Earth. The rains didn't come. The earth became dry, cracked. Plants died. Everybody was unhappy. Everyone quarreling and fighting over food. It was just a total chaos. Finally, they got back together, and Mother Earth and Father Sky agreed that they were both dependent one upon the other. Now, there are teachings, again, we're talking about metaphors, but we're also talking about very, very serious teachings about not only human relationships, but those human relationships also carry across to the landscape. And the landscape is a breathing, sentient being that needs to be paid attention to. So when you cross one of the rivers down there, you leave an offering, and that spirit of that river will go and be with you and will help to protect you. Very foreign way of Anglo's thinking about it, but it shows you that type of thing. When you pick a plant in a certain way. I had a, golly, I'll just do this one, then we'll okay. I went with an elderly woman. I mean, she was 86 years old, and we went up to Blue Mountain to pick plants. And when we were down at her home, which was down in the desert, I asked her some questions. She says, I can't really talk to you about that. It's the wrong time of year, unless we were up in the mountain. So, okay, all right, well, that's fine. You know, I certainly respect that. And she had her sister over there, and they both wanted to go to the mountain and pick plants. They needed them. They were herbalists. So I said, well, okay. And we all got, you know, there were four of us crammed in this pickup truck. You know, and we drive up to the mountain, and we go out, and she picks her plants, and then we go down to the reservoir that's down below, and she wanted to pick some plants there. So I said, okay, well, that's fine. So she goes around, and when you pick a plant, you leave an offering, but you leave an offering with one plant, but you pick another one. And the offering is there, and the plant that is left with it is going to understand and communicate to the other plants, and it's going to be, that's the way it's done. Well, we did it. We got the plants, and we got halfway around the reservoir, and all of a sudden, in our culture, we call it an orographic storm. And we have this storm that would come in, and the lightning and the rain and all that. And we beat feet back to the car and got back in the truck, and we started heading down to her home, to bring her home. And she said something really important. She says, you see, we did this right. We did it right. If I had told those stories, without being on the mountain, we never would have gotten that rain. The rain was a blessing. It's a blessing to Navajo people. They're a desert people, and they understand water. They understand rain and the importance of it. So you can see when it's all connected. We talk about spiritual and religion. It's all connected. The plant was done right. The story was told in the right place. The rains came, and we get the benefit of that, which is the holy people saying, you know what? Good job. You did it right. Okay, we better go ahead and let you go. Okay, thanks.